If you didn't already know, boxing is one of my favorite sports, right next to hockey and football. I think a whole sport where you're just punching people is pretty cool, whether it be real-life events, video games, reality TV shows, or a Scooby-Doo parody. But if you know what my channel really got big over, you know that one piece of boxing media is my favorite above the rest. Punch-Out, specifically the Wii game, taught me at a young age how good a game can really be, and I still love it even today. Punch-Out dates all the way back to 1984, as a neat little arcade cabinet that got itself 2 more cabinets and 3 console titles, as of 2022. Hopefully that number has gotten bigger if you're watching this in the future. Now, if you think that 5 is not very many for a Nintendo game that's been around since the 80s, then just look at F-Zero. Normally, I'd say the remedy would be to make a sequel, but the folks who made Punch-Out Wii, Next Level Games, are a bit tied up in the Mario franchise right now. So it seems like another Punch-Out game is off the table for a while. But I'd be fine with being wrong. Please? But this isn't about the good boxing games. Oh no. Oh no. This video is about the knockoffs. When you make a successful game, people are going to want to saturate the market with their own versions, whether it be out of passion for the original game, to make a quick buck, to add more variety for consumer choice, or otherwise. And all of those different reasons are represented in this video, even if most of the games I'm going to be talking about are dog water. I've gathered 25 different Punch-Out-esque games ranging from 1985 all the way to 2 years ago, because I haven't been able to find much after the Year of the Plagues. We're gonna work with what we got, though. Also, I should put a disclaimer. I tried to play as many games on this list that I could, but I don't have a lot of the consoles these games are on, nor am I gonna bother with a shoddy emulator for one single video, so some of these opinions are coming from footage of the game that I had to look at. I couldn't play all of them, I'm just working with what I got. And before we begin, I should clarify, what constitutes a Punch-Out-like? Well, preferably a 2 or 2.5D third-person boxing game. More specifically, one with little to no movement options and emphasis on reading your enemy's movements to counterpunch. Obviously, those aren't any sort of concrete rules. I mean, they just came out of the top of my head just now. But those will be the rules I play by for this video. Games I'm excluding include boxing fighting games, where they're set at this kind of angle, I forget what it's called. A 3D game where you can move around the ring freely, like the Fight Night series. And any boxing minigame that's part of a bigger package, like the Wii Sports Boxing game mode. It's gotta be its own thing. Also, ARMS exists. Good game, I just wish Little Mac was in it, or at least Luffy. Anyways, with all that crap out of the way, let's get into the wacky world of Punch-Out knockoffs, starting with... Released in 1985 on the Commodore 64 and developed and published by Elite Systems, this was, as far as I know, the first Punch-Out knockoff. You play as real-life boxer Frank Bruno, going up against boxers similar to the ones in the arcade game, only even more racist. Sure, Glass Joe, Don Flamenco, and Von Kaiser might be bad, but in Frank Bruno's boxing, you're pitted against the likes of Fling Long Chop, Ravioli Mafiosi, and fucking Frenchy French! Okay, Punch-Out having a boxer named Pizza Pasta is just as bad, if not worse. But Frenchy French? Oh, also this monstrosity exists. If you know anything about Punch-Out, there's a bit of a lack of originality in the character designs of Frank Bruno's, with 3 of the 8 boxers being copies of boxers from the arcade cabinets. In terms of the game itself, it looks, plays, and sounds like a Commodore 64 game. One-note gameplay, mauled sprites, and a single song that doesn't play during matches. It's just silence. So to summarize, it's the first one, and it's rough. Next! By 1987, Sega realized that there was potential for them to make their own boxing arcade cabinet. I mean, after all, it was an untapped goldmine once Nintendo stopped making their own cabinets. It just made sense, right? So Sega came up and made Heavyweight Champ. It looks more high definition than the Punch-Out arcade cabinets, but I'd argue that Punch-Out sounds better, and has you more involved with constant voice lines and sound effects during the matches.
Let's fight. Yeah. Huh. Ippo. Knock him out. Come on. Uppercut.
Heavyweight Champ is a fairly decent looking game, but unfortunately Sega was a bit late to the boxing arcade cabinet party, as Punch-Out for the NES would release the same year and blow Heavyweight Champs out of the water. Okay, so, hi, Future Goose here, recording this at, about 4 in the morning, and I've only now realized that I've messed up this section a little tiny bit as I'm, collecting footage. I know, not even 5 minutes into the video, and it's wrong, blah, blah, blah. Just listen to me, please. I'm very tired, and I want to correct this before I go to bed. So the heavyweight champ game I refer to in this section is the 1987 version, which, as it turns out, is a remake of an even earlier game, 1976 if you can believe it. Looks like this. Fucking Game of the Year. Probably the only game that came out that year. Actually false. I did some more research. Breakout for the Atari also came out this year. However, I'm only half wrong here. The 1976 heavyweight champs is from a side view perspective, which would have disqualified it from this video. I mean, the fact that it came out before Punch-Out disqualified it in the first place, but I'm losing the point. The 1987 remake of Heavyweight Champs is done with a third-person perspective in an extremely similar way to the Punch-Out arcade cabinets. So while it originally isn't a Punch-Out knockoff, they saw that the NES game was coming out soon, and decided to take this, at the time, 11-year-old game and turn it into a Punch-Out knockoff. So yeah, that's the end of my corrections. I promise not every game in this video is gonna have a super long edit or correction like that. I just said correction twice in the same sentence. I don't want to waste your time. I'm so tired. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going back to bed. Next game, please. By 1990, Punch-Out for the NES was already 3 years old, so why not make a knockoff version that was portable? And with that thought, the next game in our timeline was made. Developed in Japan by Tosei for the original Game Boy, this game, accurately titled Boxing, is exactly what it sounds like, as is every other game in this video. It's about standard for a Game Boy game. You fight against 6 different boxers, one of them being called My Tyson, subtle, in an almost entirely first-person perspective, which would disqualify this game, but in between knockouts it goes to this tiny wide shot of the whole ring, and these little fellers hopping around and just vibing are really funny to me. So I decided to include the game. Other than those things, the box art for the game is clean, the one song they use for this game gives me Mega Man vibes, and there's this cute bunny girl that holds the cards for each round. Those are the only positives I can give this game, it's just kinda there. Next! Released in 1992 on the NES and PC, and developed by both American Softworks and Nintendo, Power Punch 2 was supposed to be the sequel to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! However, after Mike Tyson, did what he did in the 90s, Nintendo dropped development on the game, as it was gonna have something to do with Mike Tyson, as far as I know. So, American Softworks picked up the rest of the workload, and they squeaked out the game in 1992. The plot of Power Punch 2 is that the character we play as, Mark Tyler, also very subtle, goes to space to fight the best boxers in the galaxy, or something. This makes it stereotype-free, since everyone's an alien. I'm gonna try and put this delicately, but the art direction and music feels very AI-generated. I don't know. No offense to the developers and composers, they obviously put in their best effort after Nintendo ditched them, and props to them for trying. It just didn't come out as something terribly good. I'm not sure how to put it. As for playing it, it's the same as Punch-Out, which makes sense since it was supposed to be the sequel, but it just felt a little more boring. I don't really know how to describe it. This game kind of puts me at a loss for words, and not in a good way. Overall, a disappointing series of events that led to the lackluster spiritual successor of the NES Classic. I'm interested in what Nintendo would have done with it if Mikey Boy didn't get in trouble, because I'm certain they didn't plan on the space idea initially. I guess we'll never know. That same year, professional boxer George Foreman woke up in a cold sweat and shouted to the heavens that he must have a Punch-Out knockoff of his own. The next day, George Foreman's KO Boxing was released for the SNES, NES, Game Boy, Mega Drive, Game Gear, and the Sega Master System. Despite how many options there were to get it, it sold poorly and got even poorer reviews. And looking at the gameplay, I can see it. It's a bit rough. You just fight the same guy with a different mugshot like 6 times and then you win the game. On top of the music in it being lackluster, if anything at all. The only reason this game's even in this video is because it doesn't break any rules. Next. 1 year later, in 1993, Just 365 days before Super Punch-Out was released, the world was gifted with Boxing Legends of the Ring, developed by Sculpted Software for the NES and Sega Mega Drive. Oh wait, most of my viewers are American, aren't they? Listen, I know it's called the Sega Genesis in America, but the Sega Mega Drive sounds way cooler, so shut up. Anyways, this game has that of the ring part at the end of its name, because you fight against boxers featured in the magazine The Ring, with said company licensing the name to Sculpted Software to make this game. As for the game itself, it's one of those realistic ones that bore me, but I'll admit it looks fine enough. Nothing to frown at, it's just kind of average. Unfortunately, average is the best most of these games are gonna get. Now, let's move on before the feeling of mediocrity soaks into my soul too much. Once Super Punch-Out came and went, George Foreman took one look at the sales and once again screamed to the heavens for a second chance in the knockoff scene. And so, in 1995, Software Creations made Foreman For Real for the Game Boy, Game Gear, Mega Drive, and NES. They reeled back their options a little bit more, but guess what? It flopped again! Learn your lesson, Georgie boy! Anyways, the one thing I can say about this game that's any sort of interesting is how the boxers look kind of goofy. Mostly due to them just slapping some photos on 3D models and making them fight each other. I'll admit, I think it was kind of brave of them to go with such an out there art style compared to the rest of the boxing knockoffs at the time, but that's the only compliment this game is gonna get. Well, one more. I think the crowd is kind of funny in the background. I know it's black to signify how many people are there, like they're all silhouettes, but it just looks like nobody came to see this boxing match. It's just straight empty. Anyways, that was George Foreman's For Really Bad Game, or whatever it's called, I forget. Next! The same year as that George Foreman game, EA Sports published Tough Man Contest, developed by High Score Productions for the Mega Drive and 32X add-on. It's a pretty cut-and-dry boxing game, but the real pull was the inclusion of Eric Butterbean Esch on the cover, and as the final boss. I'll be honest though, it doesn't really look like Mr. Butterbean. He just kind of looks the same as all the other boxers. They look identical. Despite that, it was a neat way of getting people to want to play the game, in a similar way that Mike Tyson's Punch-Out did, and how George Foreman's games tried and failed to do so I'll give them props there. I will say, I do like how the player character is just a green outline, and not like a low opacity sprite or like some weird green grid. Making your player character a green outline is kind of weird, but I like it like that. Anyways, that's all. It's just kind of basic. My only other comment is that there's a lot of scantily clad women in this game, so if being a weirdo is your thing, you'll like this game. Next! One turn of the century later, and we have our next game. Developed in 2002 for the Game Boy Advance by Full Fat, Punch King is the first major Punch-Out clone after Y2K, and the first portable one after 2000 as well. This one has a bit of a flash game feel, with a small soundtrack that does its job. Somewhat unrelated, but as for the music, I have a soft spot for the GBA sound chip, so anything that uses those kinds of sounds will make me smile very big. As for the art, it's very zoomed in, which makes sense, it's on the Game Boy Advance, and the character designs remind me of the human NPCs in the Sonic game. I don't know how to describe it, I can just imagine seeing these characters in one of the cities in Sonic Unleashed. So basically, Punch King is a simple game that does its job, but nothing more. Next! Our next game is... Oh, we're about to strike gold. If you're a die-hard Punch-Out fan, you might already know what game I'm about to talk about. Developed in 2004 by Inferno Software for the Game Boy Advance, Wade Hixton's Counterpunch is one of the most promising Punch-Out knockoffs in this video, and one of the most well-known ones. Counterpunch is the most like a Flash game out of all of the games on this list, or at the very least, late 2000s Newgrounds. All the art in the game is hand-drawn, and the character designs in this game are charming and memorable, because they're made by someone who actually knows how to design shit. As for plot, it's pretty in-depth thanks to these visual novel-esque cutscenes, something I wish the actual Punch-Out series had. The cutscenes, not the visual novel part. I don't want to date King Hippo. Amateur boxer Wade Hixton has some car trouble, resulting in him needing to box peeps for cash to fix it. He gets picked up by some manager guy and he fights people for him, and he actually ends up becoming the final boss, which is cool. As for fun facts, Wade has a pager, yes you heard that right, a pager, where he can pick and choose different challenges to play to get some cash. That definitely enhances the replayability of the game, giving you more than just the regular levels to play. In terms of Punch-Out-esque games, this one seems the coziest, with a lot of help from the Game Boy sound chip and just the art style overall. I can just imagine playing this game as a kid under the covers, way past my bedtime, playing the music very quietly because I don't want to get caught, but I still want to hear the game. It just gives me an explosion of memories that I don't have because I grew up a little bit too late for the Game Boy Advance. I was a DS kid. But hey, Flipnote was just as good. If this was a tier list of sorts, Wade Hixton's Counterpunch would be top tier. By now we have the smartphone, and developed by Glue Mobile in 2006 for said mobile phones, Super KO Boxing is the oldest Punch-Out knockoff I could find for the mobile phone. Quite possibly the first one, with that assumption coming from how bare bones the game is. Choppy gameplay, no music, and sound effects that forget to play half the time. This game is very, very quiet. As for art, it looks fairly decent. Similarly to the rest of these games, has a bit of a Newgrounds feel. And as for gameplay, it's one of the games where you just tap the left and right sides of the screen to punch, then press and hold the bottom of the screen to block. There's not really much to say, it's pretty mediocre. Sure, it's not terrible, but it doesn't stand out at all. I mean, sure, they made another one, but we'll get to that one later. A slightly unrelated tangent, but I was expecting to see more of this when I was doing research. Hajime no Ippo. It's a boxing anime that's been around since 1989, and is pretty popular in Japan, with a small fraction of that popularity being tossed over to the States. There have been a handful of Hajime no Ippo games, but most of them have you free roaming around a boxing ring, which disqualifies them from this list. So the only one of those games to make this list is Hajime no Ippo Revolution for the Nintendo Wii. The main reason being that it has this kind of behind-you camera angle instead of this bird's-eye view that the other Hajime no Ippo games have. Developed in 2007 by Cavia, Revolution is like Punch-Out Wii, but if every character was Piston Hondo and if it was dubbed.
Calm down!
Jokes about anime dubs being ass aside, this game actually looks pretty good. With how the shading is baked into the models, gives me the same vibes as One Piece Burning Blood, which is a game I like despite it being terrible. Gameplay-wise, Revolution takes on a more realistic approach to boxing, albeit with some of that special anime flair added onto it, so it gives itself a little breathing room from being compared to Punch-Out in that regard. There's also cutscenes between fights in this game, too. Apparently, too many cutscenes. So while it has a more fleshed out story, if you don't have the patience for it, you may go mad.
There's the bell! He's fighting a lot better than I expected. A fight like this is all about momentum. If he puts pressure on you, then you fight back with twice as much. Got it? Right! Calm down. Your punches are too wide again. Focus more and pick your targets. He's got some real power. He'll do the same thing in the next round. But don't cover up or back down from him. You guys are the same kind of boxer. By the way, you'll lose. Fight back. Hey, no problem. Hitting people's what I do best. This rookie's not gonna know what hit him. That's the spirit. He always acts tough when he's hurt bad. At least now he's starting to show some heart. It's the second round. Here we go!
If Punch-Out had this much story, I'd be popping off, though, so double standard or whatever. Also, the music is a vibe. That's all I gotta say about this game. Just 1 year before Punch-Out Wii comes out, and the world is blessed with the masterpiece that is Animal Boxing, developed by Spanish-based Akaoni Studios in 2008 for the Nintendo DS of all things. Animal Boxing is one of the more unique Punch-Out knockoffs, because you hold the DS upside down while you play. This is so that when you tap the touchscreen, it's like you're actually punching your opponents. And I'll give them credit, that's clever. I like that idea a lot. This game is actually pretty in-depth. There's a single-player mode with a customizable player character, a story mode about becoming a famous boxer in the Forest of Happiness to become the animal's friends and live happily ever after. I'm gonna be sick. There's also local multiplayer, allowing you to connect to nearby DS systems and box your friends. As for looks, it's pretty nice in terms of art direction. I know the DS was a bit limited, but it has a solid, albeit a tad strange-looking art style that's consistent throughout the whole game. Also, wowza, that title theme goes hard, even if it doesn't really loop all that much. And right here is where I think I'm going to put a pause on this timeline for now. Yeah, when I took a look at how many of these games there were, there was no way I could possibly fit them all into one video. So, part 2 is going to be coming out 1 week from now. Make sure to check that out once it comes out, or watch it right now if you're watching this in the future. So, yeah, I think that's it for this video. Oh wait, one last thing. I'm going to start putting fan art at the end of my videos, so look forward to seeing drawings of Goose that my fans have drawn here. Honestly, it's kind of jarring that I got any fan art, less so this much. I'm not asking for art per se, but if you do happen to draw some, just at me on Twitter. It might be in the next video. So keep your eyes open and your pencils hot. Anyways, my name is Goose. I thank you very much for watching, and make sure to watch part 2 and subscribe and ring the stupid bell or whatever. Now go away.